brief introduction. John is another Pennsylvanian who made his way to the Midwest. John Buchanan is the pastor emeritus of Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, having served as that church's senior pastor for 26 years. Prior to that ministry, he served churches in Indiana and Ohio. He was the editor and publisher of the Christian Century for 15 years, moderator of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA for the 208th General Assembly, holds honorary doctorates from 12 institutions, and perhaps most notably, he spends a good deal of his time in the greatest state in the Union, Michigan. So friends, it's my joy and privilege to welcome the Reverend Dr. John Buchanan today.
That's it, thank you.
Want this one or
This is fine. Okay. Troy, thank you. Especially that Michigan part. You need to know that I lived in Columbus, Ohio for a lot of years. We don't say that about Michigan and Columbus. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And Troy, that was a wonderful little homily. I'm not going to forget Jean Peters, was that her name? I'm not going to forget that. That sort of thing has happened to all of us and has kind of reinforced our sense that legacy societies, investments, endowments are really incredibly important to the ongoing ministries of the church. And I'm glad you're into this, and I want to encourage you to continue. At Fourth Church, the story is much the same as Kirkland Hills. We have a 100-year-old building. It was not built for this age, so it's not, everything had to be handicapped accessible. It's been a very expensive building to upkeep. And had it not been for the endowment, which by the way does the same thing at Fourth Church, Church of the Hills, it essentially pays for the building and allows all the other income to go to mission and ministry. And that in turn makes the church a very lively and attractive place. Doing all kinds of involvement in the community. I looked up, I guess Sue told me about William Ferry. What an amazing man he must have been. Was he mayor or something politically? I think he was, well, whatever. He was deeply, deeply involved in Western Michigan and this area particularly. And he's a reminder of the deep Presbyterian value of investment in communities where they are. We've been embedded in American culture long before the Revolutionary War. One of our pastors, the president of the college in New Jersey, John Witherspoon, was the only clergy to sign the Declaration of Independence. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, Presbyterians went everywhere. And everywhere they went, they got involved in the community, mostly through education. The vast number of early colleges and universities were, in fact, when you look into it, started by some kind of nameless Presbyterian pastor who said this place needs some educational institutions. So that's who we are, and Mr. Ferry certainly is a reminder of that, and it's wonderful that this effort is named for him. Good to catch up with Sue Vandenbosch again. She was a very faithful member of Fourth Church while I was there, and a good friend besides, and I can see she's still infused with energy and love for the church, and that makes me feel very good. When I was a child, a long time ago, every Sunday evening, my mother and father and little brother and I would gather in our living room to listen to the radio. There was no television, so we sat around the big floor model Philco radio with the mysterious green dial in the front. And listened to 30-minute radio programs one after another. Believe it or not, we thought that was highly entertaining. Fibber McGee and Molly, the Phil Harris Show, and everybody's favorite at the time was Jack Benny. You remember Jack Benny, some of you are maybe old. Part of Benny's comedic persona was his his legendary cheapness. Now, he wasn't like that in real life, but he certainly was on the program. He made the most of it. He had associates on the program, Mary, his wife, and his valet and driver, Rochester. And the high point of each program was when Benny and Rochester went down the basement to the money vault. And it was just high humor, I thought, at the time. The stairs creaked and they got down there, the door was squeaky and the cash drawers opened up. I thought it was just amazing. In one sketch, which later became a television commercial, Benny is mugged, and a thug sticks a gun in his side and says, "Your life or your money, or your money or your life." And then ensues a long silence. Then he doesn't say anything, and the longer it goes, the funnier it is. Finally, impatient, with a gun in his hand, he said, "I said, your money or your life." And Benny says, I'm thinking about it." Well, I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. Years after a vocation that turned out, to my great surprise, to have a great deal to do with money. I wonder if there was and is more than humor to that little statement, your money or your life. As Troy mentioned, money's at the center of our ministry. I never realized it, so after I got into it, I had no idea when I was in the process of deciding to be a Presbyterian minister that life would have to do with money a lot of the times. Raising money every year, asking people to give their money, trying to balance the church budget, raising money for a capital project, for a new carpet for the sanctuary, a new pipe organ, a new building. It never occurred to me at the time, but I've since learned that when you're talking and thinking about money, you're also talking and thinking about something profound. Our deepest values, for instance. The meaning, in fact, of our lives. Your money or your life. As you know, one time Jesus said, "No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." That's how the most recent translations have it. The older version, the one with which you and I are familiar, was you can't serve God and mammon. Well, I think mammon's a great word. Mammon is money, but it's much more. Wealth is another way to say it. That's not strong enough either. Mammon is more like the lifelong project of accumulating resources, money, wealth, but more than that, it's the lifelong project of doing everything we can to try to nail down our security, our ultimate security. One good definition of mammon is stuff. We live in a most acquisitive, accumulative culture the world has ever known. We love our stuff. We have so much stuff that a major industry is building and renting and maintaining space to store the stuff for which we no longer have room in our homes. Count them sometimes when you're driving it. The countryside is littered with storage bins. I read an article in the New York Times once about people who literally go to visit their stuff on a weekly basis. There was a picture of a man sitting in a folding chair, beer in hand, in front of the open door of his storage space, crammed to overflowing with his stuff. He looked very happy, actually. Now, I confess that this makes me a little nervous because, frankly, I love my stuff. It's probably because I was born just as the Great Depression was ending, and there simply wasn't much stuff in our home. In any event, I still find it painfully difficult to let go of anything. I will wear a dress shirt until it's threadbare, until my wife sneaks into my closet and gets it out. When we moved from a condo to a retirement community where we are now, it necessitated downsizing, a phrase I loathe actually. I had to reduce the number of books in my on my shelves, and it was excruciating. I put it off and put it off, and finally Sue said, "Now go in there, and don't come out until you have at least 3 books." Well, I did it. I looked at each one carefully, saw what I had scribbled in the margins, what I had underlined. I realized that left on my own, I could never do this job. But I did it that day and did it some more and gave away maybe 25 or 30% of my books. And I still haven't do many. What saves me from being overwhelmed by my stuff is a wife who, in this regard at least, is the complete opposite, or perhaps better said, a complement. This is a woman who does, for me, the unthinkable. When we travel and have a long flight, she brings along a paperback book. And then as she reads, she tears out the pages and puts them in a little pocket in front of her. And if it's long enough flight and she's on the top of her game, when we arrive, there's no book at all. It's gone. Her rule of thumb for books is 2 years and out. She sweetly says, did you read that book or use that or look at it in the last 2 years? And I lie. I said, of course, just last week I was reading through volume 3 of Paul Tillich's Systematic Theology. Things got a little touchy when we moved from a big house in Columbus, Ohio to downtown Chicago. For months before the move, she was in her element. And every day the children and I would meet in the alley behind the house after school and go through all the stuff she had thrown out, recover our treasures, and secretly bring them back in the house. You cannot serve two masters, Jesus said. You cannot serve God and Mammon. Please note that he did not condemn money. Having money, being wealthy. Money's not the problem for Jesus. He had friends who, by the standards of that day, were men and women of means. Money isn't the problem. It's serving, worshiping, trying to secure your future, trying to establish and nail down the meaning of and significance of your life on the basis of what you accumulate and own. Mammon doesn't work, doesn't get the job done. If you're looking for meaning, if you're looking for salvation. St. Paul said much the same thing. He wrote to his young protege, Timothy, love of money is the root of all evil. Notice again the balance. It's not the money that's the problem. There were some in Paul's day who thought money was the problem, evil, and to be avoided in a life of self-denial and poverty, but not Paul. It's the love, the value, the accumulation in order to secure yourself. Popular author Anne Lamott, who is, by the way, a Presbyterian, says, I've been rich and I've been poor. Rich is a lot better. St. Paul's first letter to Timothy is full of down-to-earth, wise, practical advice from an older man to a younger man. We brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. That's St. Paul. One of those priceless New Yorker cartoons showed two elderly gentlemen, clearly very wealthy, immaculately dressed, three-piece suits, top coats with fur around the collar, walking sticks, standing in front of the fresh grave of their former business partner. How much did he leave, one asks. And the other says, he left all of it. The late Robert Woodlynn was head of the Department of Religion at the Lilly Endowment, and he wrote, money has a particular power in American life. Lacking a landed gentry or titled aristocracy, the primary indicator of status in American life is the amount of money a person controls. Consequently, money has a symbolic place in our common life that enables it to fulfill a number of economic functions, non-economic functions. Money, he said, is the way many middle-class Americans keep score in various competitions. There's a downside to all of this, of course. We know now that when money and wealth become the guiding light, the major life goal, relationships suffer, and so does emotional and physical health. When making money becomes the determining factor in one's life, something very important disappears. But money itself is not bad. In fact, money is potential for good, for creativity, for imagination, for justice and mercy and health. Presbyterians are sons and daughters of John Calvin, and even if we've never read a word of Calvin, which I suspect is true for many of us, we have been profoundly influenced by John Calvin and the 16th century Protestant Reformation. For most of history, after all, worldly was a derogatory bad word. Before the Reformation, Christians seemed to believe that the world was a nasty, sinful place. Christianity seemed to believe that the human body, by all means, with its appetites and desires, its passions and needs, its messy physicality, was to be subdued, denied, ignored, and disciplined. The goal was to have as little to do with the world as possible, to live an otherworldly life. The ideal, pre-Reformation, was life in a cloistered monastery, celibacy, poverty, life securely apart from the everyday life that everybody else was leading. Remnants of that thinking are still very much alive. The Roman Catholic insistence, for instance, that celibacy is better, more moral, more pleasing to God than a life of normal, healthy sexuality. More moral than God wants. And some evangelicals and evangelical Protestants continue to teach that the good life is lived a safe distance from the temptations of the world. That's reflected in a little ditty I learned to sing when I went to Bible school with my Baptist chums long, long ago. Maybe you remember it. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above, you know the song, looking down in love. So be careful, little eyes, what you see. And then it went on. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little hands, what you touch. Be careful, little feet, where you go. Those same Baptists, by the way, were absolutely sure that drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes, both of which my parents did, constituted a direct road to hell, along with other worldly activities like dancing, going to the movies, playing cards, even for them reading the comic strips on Sunday. I sang that little song with gusto. But even at the age of 10, I knew that something was terribly wrong there. Well, it was John Calvin, actually, who said that Christian life is to be lived thoroughly in the world, this world, with all its moral ambiguity and messiness and violence, that it is a Christian responsibility to live out life of discipleship not apart from, but within the structures of society, political, social, economic, artistic, financial. The world is not a dirty place. The world has fallen, to be sure, never quite living up to God's expectations of it, but the world is the apple of God's eye. God loves us, the world so much as to create it, as to bless it, as to call it good, and come to live in it, in the life of a beloved Son. Calvin insisted that Christian faith has everything in the world to do with the world. 16th century Geneva, Switzerland, where he was. In its laws, with his influence, Geneva passed the first labor laws, the first youth children laws in history. He was on the town consistory, and in that role, he helped to establish new guidelines for accurate scales in the marketplace, so that merchants weren't ripping off their customers. In fact, he was even involved in constructing a sewerage system. Worldly Christianity is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called it. Early 20th century German sociologist and philosopher, author of The Protestant Ethic and Capitalism, Max Weber, said that Calvin actually changed the way civilization thought about wealth, and credited John Calvin with inspiring the spirit of capitalism. Jesus said, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be." Did you ever think about how counterintuitive that is? Opposite to the way we think it should be. He should have said, "Where your heart is, there your treasure is." He said the reverse. He said it's much more complicated and complex than that. Your treasure, where it is, What you do with it will reflect your deepest commitments, your true passion, your heart. Someone observed that our personal credo is written in our check stubs. Today, that would be our monthly Visa or MasterCard bill. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I've been thinking about legacy, my legacy, modest as it is. What difference in the final analysis my being here has made in the life of the world? I think we all get around to thinking that. The passing of time promotes it. Another birthday at an age when I used to think was very, very old. Grandchildren graduating from high school and college, grandchildren getting married. Now, I'm particularly fortunate that my grandchildren are absolutely the most beautiful and finest grandchildren in the world. I've got pictures here to show you. I'm profoundly grateful that the world will be a better place for their having lived in it. And that I had something to do with that makes me very grateful. But beyond that, I want to do what I can to assure that the societal structures that I believe are important and absolutely essential to human well-being are strong and sustained into the future. The arts, education, for instance. Robert Frost said somewhere that you can do far worse than give your heart to a college. But foremost for me is church, my church, a church like this one, a church that reflects with modesty and authenticity and integrity the precious Reformed tradition that goes all the way back 5 centuries to John Calvin and Martin Luther. A church that remembers and celebrates the life of the mind, the central importance of the never-ending intellectual search for truth. A religious faith that does not flinch from and despise science, but welcomes scientific inquiry. A faith always seeking understanding. A church that remembers and reflects the importance of the arts to human well-being. That remembers and reminds the world that Christian faith has inspired some of the most sublime art and architecture and literature and poetry and music human beings have ever created. A church that reminds the world that Christian faith matters, socially, politically, economically. A church that remembers and reminds the world of the beauty and life-giving power of community, something we all, I know, appreciate much more at the end of COVID than ever before. Isn't it wonderful to simply sit back in your pew again with your friends? A church that remembers and attempts to emulate Jesus' radical inclusivity, his love for all people, particularly those on the outside. I want in some way to be part of strengthening and giving life and courage and a secure future to that kind of church for my children and grandchildren and their children and grandchildren. I'm particularly fortunate to call Martin Marty a friend. He is a very distinguished historian, professor emeritus at the Divinity School of the University of Chicago, author of about 80 books, and the person to whom Time Magazine and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal always turned to when they wanted an intelligent word about religion and life. He's in his 90s now. He was legendary for his scholarly output and grueling schedule. Marty would go anywhere to make a speech, to do a lecture, teach. Someone asked him why he continued to do that. His response was a classic and a useful way to bring this to a close. He quoted blind pianist George Shearing, I suspect some of you remember him too, who when asked if he had been blind all his life responded, "Not yet, not yet." Well, Marty wrote, "Not yet." When asked whether I've done all the seeking and aspiring, all the enjoying and loving, all the greeting and cherishing friends and strangers, and asked whether I've heard all the music and tasted all the wine and food and participated in the blessed Christian community that I'd like, I answer, not yet. So we're not done yet. For most of us, the final not yet will be the final disposition and investment of our resources, the work of our hands, the Psalms eloquently calls it, the final summation of our being here. And so in that spirit, I commend to you this wonderful effort, this wonderful church, the Ferry Legacy Society. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. Thank you so much for listening to me.
You're not going to leave with that?
I was hoping you wouldn't notice.
Thank you, John. So, thinking about legacy is a newer endeavor for First Presbyterian Church Grand Haven. The William Montague Ferry Legacy Society began only in 2016, shortly before my arrival. Our records now show that there are 22 households as part of the Legacy Society, so that is tremendous news and tremendous growth. Some of you are here today. Thank you for being a part of the society. I'm not going to ask you to stand up, so don't worry about that. Some of your names are on the wall, and some of your names are anonymous on the wall. But let's just give a moment of applause to thank those who are already part of the Legacy Society. Now, some of those in the society have already passed on from this life to the next and blessed our church along the way. We are already benefiting today from their generosity. It is a joy to watch our church embrace this concept of legacy. And so I celebrate every time I see another plaque filled on our legacy tree outside of the sanctuary. And I do so because those names are part of what will help us ensure that the ministry of Christ will continue through the church that William Ferry founded all the way back in 1836. Because of COVID, and frankly because Jess and I are trying to be adults now, we got our estate plans together last year, which Alicia's back there celebrating because she's been after me to do this. We wanted to make sure our kids had what they needed. We wanted to ensure that our directions were clear about their care, but we also wanted to make sure that our beliefs about the generosity in our life and about the church were reflected in our estate. So we've committed to tithing from our estate, whatever size that is when the Lord calls us home, 10% of what we have to be divided equally among the churches that we have served. Now, I was just telling someone this recently, and he quipped, well, I hope you stay a long time here. Makes sense to me. So we want to show our children, we want to show their children, we want to show our communities and churches that we believe in the church's mission, not only in life, which is really, really important, but also beyond life. So we are now proud members of the Ferry Legacy Society. I just saw our name up on the tree just a couple of weeks ago. It's fun to see. And it's my hope, it's the generosity committee of our church's hope that for those of you who are not yet members of this, that you would join us and consider the church in your own legacy planning. There is not one set path for this. You certainly don't have to be Gene Peters and leave $500,000, although you can. This is about how you say yes to your church in life and in death, and you bless the ministry of the church through thick and thin in the years to come. And I just have to say that I really think that this is going to be an essential piece to the health of churches in the coming generation, particularly as we ride the waves of people coming and going from church. There will be members of our generosity committee who could answer questions if you have those. I know there are sheets over there if you want interest to express interest. Perhaps you're someone who's already put the church into your legacy plans and you just have never told us. It is a blessing for us to know that. It is also a blessing for the church to see that, to see the society growing, to see that there is a groundswell of movement in this. So thank you, all of you, for considering that. Thank you for being a part of this. So the rest of the afternoon is meant to be a time of socialization, to get to know each other, to enjoy some good food together. I also hope you'll add your name to the list of people in the Ferry Legacy Society. I keep saying Pharisee, that's probably a bad thing. There'll be drinks, there'll be hors d'oeuvres. Before we send everyone from their tables, I think we're going to do a drawing for a giveaway for the centerpieces. So Tina, do you have that, or you need me to wait for a second on that? All right. And I think you can sneak outside if that's your comfort level. It's a beautiful day outside. There are high tops, there are tables to be had. We can enjoy our time together. Do I get to draw?
Sure.
Or do
Let's
we-
say the first name can take the flowers on the food table, and then the other 3 names we draw will be the smaller ones.
All right.
Don't draw your own.
All right. She's not here. She misses out. All right. Pat, you get the food table. Flowers. You all remember Padlock, right? Glad you're here. All right, and then we'll just take for the other tables. The McLaughlins get to go home with some flowers. The Kenricks. All right. There we go. And here's our last one, Shirley Hipwell. So there we go. Is there anything else I need to share with them before we send them to enjoy themselves?
I don't think so.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being a part of the Ferry Legacy Society or considering being a part of the Ferry Legacy Society. John, thank you so much for making the trip up to be with us and sharing your thoughts on legacy and life and money. Believe it or not, I know Fibber McGee. My dad would share those stories with me because he'd sit with his dad and listen to those. So I know Fibber McGee. Those things keep coming along. So thank you, and may God bless you. May God bless the church, not just here in Grand Haven, but all over the country through your efforts. Enjoy yourselves this afternoon.